Well, our guest tonight is Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. She is a board-certified internal medicine physician and has an active medical practice near Birmingham, Alabama. She received her BS in biochemistry at the University of Georgia and graduated with honors from Harry Medical College in Nashville. She's been an adjunct faculty member at Baker College and Davenport University in Michigan, teaching courses on health, nutrition, and disease progression. She's an international media resource on the mind, body, spirit connection. She's been featured in Prevention, Women's Day on MSNBC, and in Redbook, First for Women, and numerous other media outlets. She joins us this evening to share why rest is necessary, even in a time of quarantine and staying at home. And she discusses this in her book, Sacred Rest: Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity. Welcome to the Busted Halo Show, Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It is great to have you with us because I get this feeling that everybody thinks, because we're not commuting and we're just kind of wearing our jammies and looking at Zoom calls, that we're all well rested. Do you find that to be the case right now?
No, I think most of us feel like we are more tired than ever. And,
Really?
you know, the thing that I'm finding is that a lot of the different studies that have come out recently stated that about 70% of people since COVID began feel like they are not sleeping well, and about half of those people feel like they are more anxious than they have ever been in their entire life.
More anxious, wow. Would some of that, maybe we could probably guess, might be connected to not only the financial instability, but this big question, and maybe this is, you can bring to bear on this as a medical doctor, the unknown. Like when somebody goes to a hospital and they have some tests and the tests don't show anything, they go some other tests. And oftentimes I find, you know, that it's one thing to have a diagnosis of something that's severe, but I find that people are perhaps even more frustrated or anxious when they don't know what the thing is. And that's a little bit how we're living right now. We don't know when this is going to end. We don't know exactly how it's transmitted or if we're going to be immune. And all. Is that unknown piece, is that particularly anxiety producing?
Absolutely. I think the unknown is really what's adding some of that fight or flight response that our body's experiencing. Cortisol levels are going up, our stress levels are staying higher. And then that brings to the forefront that most of us have no idea how to rest. We're natural workaholics. We live in a culture where work is really uplifted and promoted more so than rest. And so it just creates this atmosphere where it's very easy to become toxically involved with life.
Well, and even the classic R&R, rest and recreation, has turned into mostly that second R. And really, rather than R&R, I would say the new buzzword, not even just of the new generation, but even older folks like me, is work hard, play hard, right?
Yeah, and so the thing with that is that work and play are both usually pouring out in some way. You're using your energy, you're expelling energy. So even fun energy is not necessarily restful. I really think that's probably the number one thing that people have to come to grips with is when we talk about rest, we're not talking about just cessation of activity. So it's not stopping, it's not quitting your job, it's not a vacation. It's really what are the restorative activities you're doing to help revive those parts of your life that get depleted.
Okay. And in a particular way, in addition to the many medical ways and body and mind things that we could talk about, you weave in for us, and this is of particular interest to our audience, the spiritual dimension, because your book is called Sacred Rest. How does our faith inform either our need for rest or what we can do to be resting?
Well, I think it has to be the foundation. As a physician, you know, faith and medicine sometimes don't appear to go together, but having practiced medicine for over 20 years clinically, it's become very obvious that when someone has a difficult time resting, that it ends up playing a role in every other area of their life. It starts playing a role in their relationships, not just their physical bodies, but other parts of their life that, if not healthy, start really making them feel even more drained, more lifeless, getting to the point of feeling depressed. And so what I find is for most of us, if we are able to combine those all parts of ourselves, the mind, the body, and the spirit, and that's the part of the research that I spent most of my time and most of my career, is looking at how do all three of these areas work together so that when we talk about health and wellness, we're looking at a very holistic approach to it.
Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith is our guest here on the Busted Halo Show, and we're talking about her book, sacred rest, recover your life, renew your energy, restore your sanity. Do you find, I mean, when we talk about body, mind, spirit, do you find that within the faith community, and maybe this is just within our tradition of Catholicism, but maybe this is more broadly in the Christian experience, at least here in North America, do you find that people hear those as buzzwords, as like, you know, new agey and yoga, and wait a minute, body, mind, spirit? No, that's not my Christianity. Do you find that people are resistant to seeing how those things come together, or find it too, you know, too new age or liberal or progressive or something?
I think sometimes that is a battle for some people, because when they think about their lives, they think about these things as being segmented, but they're all actively engaged in their life throughout the day. And I think that's why when I started looking at rest, I didn't want to just focus on those three, because when we say body, mind, and spirit, I think there are a large number of people who start thinking that maybe this isn't for me. But when I talk about 7 different types of rest, and I talk about how each of the 7 plays into your life, people tend to have a more open approach to it.
All right, so 7 types of rest. Give us at least a couple. You know, people can buy the book for all 7, but maybe a little teaser. What are some of these 7 types?
Yeah, well, I'll give you all 7. We won't
Okay,
go
all
deeply
right.
into them all. So the 7 types, we start off with the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. And then the 4 that are lesser known and that really a lot of people have difficulty with are the emotional, the sensory, the social, and the creative types of rest. And what I find is that many people have a deficiency in one of those latter 4. And because they're not even an area of their life that they think about needing to restore and to be actively productive in putting some effort into getting rest in those areas, then those are the areas that stay depleted. And because they stay depleted, when someone says they're tired, they don't really mean they're physically tired. They're tired in one of these other areas.
So those 4 you said that maybe are lesser observed or focused on, or at least we're even lesser aware of that we need rest in these areas: social, creative, emotional. What was the 4th?
So there's social, creative, emotional, and sensory.
Sensory. Okay. So say what you mean by those.
So sensory
Like
rest,
sensory, for instance. I'm going to take a little stab. I'm going to take a little guess.
yeah.
So, Saundra, you're in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm in Midtown Manhattan. Now, even though there's a COVID, coronavirus going around, I just a couple of days ago had the opportunity to get away and get to upstate New York with a lake and a forest and hardly anybody around. And boy, when I do something like that, and I return to the city, I am reminded how my senses every single day are assaulted by all sorts of senses. Obviously, the sounds. Brett's been talking about the fact that for the last, I think since he moved into that apartment, they've been like buzz sawing and right next door, right, Brett?
Right.
A lot of sounds.
Yes.
But also even the things that might sound silly, like our olfactory sense, like the smells. You walk through New York City and, you go 5 feet and there's a new smell. And it's not just like, I'm not in the... So am I off base? Is that what we're talking about in terms of like sensory rest?
No, you really hit it. You actually hit 2 of them in that description you just described. So you talked about sensory, and without knowing it, you talked about creative rest. So sensory rest is basically, just like you said, allowing your senses to be downgraded. There are so many sensory inputs, and it can be from touch, it can be from smell, sounds, lights, our gadgets, the notifications on our phones. I mean, there are so many sensory inputs that we don't even think about, but they keep us in a constant state of really agitation. We're almost, if you think about our cell phones, there was some studies that talked about how when the notifications go off, it's almost like this jerking reaction to the body to quickly pick it up and answer it, even if it's not something important, even if it's just like, a social media notification that someone posted something. You don't really need to jump to attention to answer that, but that's how we act sometimes, and it keeps us in this sensory overload. So it's important to be just very intentional about getting rest by spending some time in silence, by making sure that you do spend some time away from your electronics, that you're turning down the lights at night, even on your computer, so that you're not just having all of this blue light all the time, just kind of constantly confronting you.
It confronts me all the time, that blue light.
Yeah.
Well, right now I'm looking at I can't tell you how many different screens.
I was just going to tell you,
surrounded.
I think Saundra should know that even if you're not in the middle of Times Square, you've created just about the amount of light and sound energy that Times Square has created in your 10 by 10 studio in the basement of the church.
Very small.
You actually like to be bombarded. I'm glad Saundra's telling you to maybe, dial it down every once in a while.
I do, but I also appreciate, and Saundra, maybe this is another faith connection that might reinforce this, and realizing that I definitely feel blessed and privileged that once a year, usually, I can take a personal retreat, go somewhere and really do all the things you're talking about, unplug it all, stop the ding and the texts and all that. And I like to go to the desert. I mean, we hear that a lot in scripture, but I actually love it. And being there with the cacti and all that kind of stuff to engage. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence where we see throughout scripture and our Christian tradition down through the ages, come into the desert where you can hear the voice of the Lord. Even Jesus did that. He went into the wilderness and the desert so that he who is one in the Trinity with the Father, he could actually commune and have some quality time. And now I realize not everybody can take time off the job or they can take a 3 or 4 day retreat. But what are some maybe ways in everyday life, perhaps even now, Saundra, this might be a good opportunity to talk about. A lot of us are still quarantined at home. Maybe we've got the kids in there. Maybe we've got our spouse and we're both on Zoom calls all day. What are some ways that we can find these little mini retreat moments?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that in answering also kind of that portion about creative rest. Because when you were discussing kind of breaking away, you mentioned getting around some bodies of water and having a chance to see these things. Well, that you actually just described what creative rest is.
Oh.
Creative rest is the rest that we experience when we allow creation, whether that's man-made creation, like going to a museum or a symphony or nature, to awaken something inside of us, to allow us to feel that restorative component of being in creation. And so a lot of people experience this when they're around bodies of water. Some people say when they're around oceans or the lake or something that they automatically feel better, but they've never been able to quantify exactly what that was. That's creative rest. And the research is really interesting because when they did some studies with people looking at their brain MRIs, when they were looking at images of bodies of water, they weren't at the beach. They weren't near the river. They were looking at something on a computer screen, that the brains of those people who say that they feel better around water actually had chemical changes that were present on the MRI. They could see activity in those areas. So that's a very simple way. If you're someone who, you don't have to be a creative to need creative rest. If you're innovative, if you're someone who's always having to think outside the box, come up with new ideas, you're using creative energy. And so you can get creative rest as simply as changing the image on your lock screen so that it's something that's inspiring to you.
Is that why they like Windows has as the background behind all your little busy icons? It's got that little rolling green hills and the sun is coming. Wow, they're clever. They knew that.
There's a lot of ways that you can actually make people automatically start feeling calmer. And so it's different for different people. One person loves the mountains, the other person loves the lake, someone else loves being in the forest. So you can't always hit everyone's preference, but there is some truth to that if you're trying to create an atmosphere that is kind of open to being able to be innovative, then it's helpful to keep that in mind. A lot of big companies are doing that now. Instead of having the brown and gray and beige walls, they're using color and they're using very strategic color patterns to promote that level of creativity they desire.
All right, well, I'm going to go with forest.
He switched his.
Look at that.
Look at that. Nice.
This really was so nice to be in the forest, just on the bike. I'm like, driving along.
Yeah, that's a different vibe than Times Square. You're right, in terms of sensory overload.
Very different, very different. Right. So sacred rest, recover your life, renew your energy, restore your sanity. Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, would you, when people kind of seek you out for advice, do you find something that is more common than some of these other deficiencies? I mean, of these 7 things, what's the one we neglect the most?
Emotional rest.
Emotional rest, okay.
It's across the board.
So what does that mean?
Well, the emotional rest basically boils down to the rest we receive when we allow ourselves to be just very authentic and open about where we're at. So it's taking off the mask. It's not people pleasing, letting yourself just be very truthful in what's going on in your life. And so I find a lot of times that people have difficulty with this if they're in positions of power or leadership, because they want to kind of keep that professional persona and not let people know if they're struggling with something or having difficulty with an area. The problem with that is when you feel like no one really knows you, like all of you, you feel like something's wrong with you, and that there's something wrong with you at the core, which then leads to more feelings of depression. And it's those situations when you start finding people who are extremely successful who have committed suicide, because it's like, what happened? What happens is when you feel like you're pouring into the world, but the world doesn't know you, it's not a good place to be.
Wow. This is good stuff. Thank you. And now I have an idea why Christina maybe found you, booked you for the show. Uh-oh, those people's in the positions of leadership who are on the radio.
She's trying to vie for more rest in all 7 ways.
I think all 7 of these, I definitely need to dig into this sacred rest. Well, thank you for not only the research and, let's say, that the secular or the scientific, but the way in which you've helped integrate our faith. Thank you.
Yeah, and the thing about emotional rest that really hit me as far as the scriptural part of it was, I think in the Bible, we see some really amazing examples of emotional rest patterned through the life of Jesus. Specifically, when you think about how his ministry was set up, ministering to the masses, large groups of people, then you see this kind of closer knit circle of 12. And then you see these times when he breaks away with just 3, like at the Mount of Transfiguration, where he's kind of reveals the fullness of who he is in that setting. And I think everybody's life needs to have that level of segmentation, where it's not going to be like a room full of people you just pour your soul out to, but there should be some people who know you at the fullest level of who you are, and that you feel safe doing that.
So there's a new concept over the last few years of a mental health day. Can we take your book and theories and say that we now have 7 different categories of a new day that I need rest? Like today, I need a creative rest. Tomorrow, I'm going to need an emotional rest, and so on and so forth. Yeah. But now I have different forms. I've got different forms of it. And that was half kidding, half joke. Do you think that people can actually rest too much? And I don't just mean like the concept of just being lazy, but like, I think particularly during quarantine, and I don't think I'm alone, it's like the rest turns into restlessness. Like I've been resting, I feel like it's been helping, and now I'm just, what do I do with this? Is there such thing as too much rest? And I don't just mean lazy and not doing anything.
Yeah, I think there is. I call it a work-rest ratio. There's a ratio between where you are producing at your highest, where you don't show up at work feeling like, oh, here we go, another Monday, but you feel energized, you feel excited about the work that you're doing, you're motivated. And then there's a level of work where you are just grinding from your emptiness. And that's where we don't want to be. And that's where so many people have been for so long.
That's what we usually call a Thursday show. Just grinding from
on that one.
Grinding from our emptiness.
Speak for yourself.
All right. Okay.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, and it is about balance. But I think it's very helpful to know that there's that many different types, and that means there's that many different types of combating those different types. So that was very helpful for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure that you are kind of aware of which ones you're more likely to be deficient in, because most people that's what they'll say to me. You just gave me 7 more things to put on my to-do list.
You're stressing me out with your rest.
Yeah, you're stressing me out. But the reality is most of us are already excelling at some of these. We're doing it without, like you were saying, you're doing it without even thinking about it. You know that there's something that needs to be restored, and so you kind of instinctively go and do it. But for some of us, particularly those last 4, we don't even know that it's something we can ask for ourselves.
Right.
So we just stay in the level of depletion without being kind of having that permission to get that rest in that area.
Father Dave, I
that's
will be
good.
taking the rest of the show off because I have been missing these forms of rest, and they will be put in the next 20 minutes of the show.
Well, I was thinking that when Saundra was talking that Christina is excelling at the social rest. All right, I don't need to be around you guys.
Yes.
I'm happy in my little laundry room here.
She has
Just gonna mute my mic
maximized.
here.
Christina has maximized certain forms of rest. It seems like a backhanded compliment, but it's
Actually,
you're
I have
great.
a question. I'm very introverted. So do you think introverts naturally lean more towards rest, or is it would be surprising to me if extroverts do. So I'm just curious if there is one side leaning more or if it's an equal thing.
I find that introverts tend to have an easier time with certain types of rest and harder times with other types of rest. For example, introverts tend to have an easier time with sensory rest is what I'm finding, because they're okay with being in silence and by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a problem with that. Where extroverts are like, no, we like the noise. We want to have kind of the ruckus going on all the time around us. And then I find that introverts tend to have a very hard time with the emotional rest part of it, which I thought was very interesting. But because they are so good with themselves, they're not as easily, not at the point where they're actually wanting to open themselves up to other people so easily. So they kind of keep things in a little bit more and aren't as quick to just share everything. Whereas extroverts tend to be able to do that a little bit easier.
Sharing things, extroverts? I have no idea what you're talking about.
I understand that this is verging on ironic because we were supposed to let you go a few minutes ago, and I don't want you to rest yet because this is a fascinating topic. Because you've put into terms things that I think about a lot, and I'm wondering if certain things are confused as rest, which is to say, let's say I think I'm resting by putting a movie on Netflix, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I shouldn't be watching this movie. I should be doing something else that's more productive. Or the movie is actually stressing me out because of what's going on in the movie. I mean, is there ways that we're faking ourselves out, that we think that we're resting and we're not?
Yes, that topic ended up as my TEDx talk.
Oh, look at that. Perfect.
All right, if you could just do that again, that would be great.
It's so confusing for so many people because so many people say on the weekend, I'm going to go take a rest. And either they mean they're just going to sleep, which is only one of the 7 types, which are missing the other 6, or they mean they're going to veg out and basically do escapism activities like, watch Netflix or, play on the social media and look at your social media posts for 4 hours on the sofa and call that rest. It's not rest if you can't say what was restored. Rest equals restorative activity. Something has to be restored. And so it's really interesting because I'll have wives call me and say, my husband's out there chopping wood and says he's getting rest when he comes back in. And it's like, well, he's not getting physical rest because his body's active, but chopping wood's kind of a brainless activity. You don't have to think about it. So for some people, that is mental rest. They can get there. It's almost like a meditative state.
Yeah.
They can get their cerebral space to shut up long enough to kind of clear it out. And so that's the thing. Rest looks different for different people, but as long as you can identify what you're restoring of those 7 areas.
I mean, for some husbands, I guess rest would be chopping wood. I say to the other guys here at the rectory, I'm gonna go do a radio show, guys. I gotta.
And that would be
rest.
like that's the furthest from rest that they can imagine.
Yeah, they say,
That's
I
like
don't know
the
how
worst.
you do that.
They get stressed out thinking that you do that every day.
Right. They do. They do.
I have to rest from this conversation. Can you sit at a different table?
Well, Brett is correct, Saundra. This is a fascinating topic. We'll certainly put a link to your book. Maybe, Christine, you can find the TED Talk as well. Cassandra's TED Talk, because it sounds like that's cool. We'll put that as a link on our radio blog, bustedhalo.com/radio. Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, we're going to now let you rest from talking about all this.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Rested from the Zoom and all that. All right. Take care. Thank you for joining us. When we return, more of a Busted Halo show on a Thursday. And I didn't mean that before about Thursday show. It's one of our best days of the week. Thursday show.
I think it's appropriate that we're giving people a 2.5-minute rest now.
That's what we are.
We call it a break, but
So keep it on the Catholic channel, Sirius XM 129.